Good evening, members, and welcome to tonight's meeting. Welcome to members of the public in the gallery. Would you please be seated? Shall I ask Veronica to say our prayers for us for tonight, please? Thank you.
Okay, so let us pray. Heavenly Father, we give thanks for those who lead this council. We ask, Lord, that you give wisdom to all councillors as they consider the items on the agenda this evening, including the St. Mary's Roundabout roadworks, the Leaders' Update Report, the council tax reduction scheme, and the appointment of a designated independent person. We ask that you bless those who care for loved ones at home, for professional carers, and for doctors, nurses, and staff at St. Mary's Hospital. Comfort and heal those who are sick or in any kind of need. We hold before you, Lord, the upcoming elections, giving thanks for our democratic system. We pray that the voters have access to accurate information, and we give thanks to those who put themselves forward for public office and can commit themselves to that. We ask that you guide and strengthen them. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Lord. Please be seated. Thank you. Members and officers, you may remove your jackets if you wish to do so. If we can go to apologies.
Chair, just in relation to the apologies, and I want to thank our new monitoring officer for this. Councillor Mosdell and Councillor Brading, although not here this evening, are representing the council at the National Children and Adult Services Conference and Exhibition in Bournemouth. And I say it in that way because it may be that other members from across the chamber from time to time will find themselves not able to be at full council meetings. And historically, it's been a case of a cross in the box whether you were here or not. But actually, if you're representing the council, and I know Councillor Stevens sometimes represents the council when he's in England on the fire service, what we've said is we'll make a note, so it is in members' interest to explain if they're not here for a reason. The other apology, but I'm not really apologising for him, I wanted to welcome back Councillor Merwell, who, as you know, has been away for some period of time, but he's back with us today, and just wanted to, on your behalf, welcome him as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. If we can, Councillor Brading.
Clarification from you, perhaps, and perhaps the monitoring officer, regarding attendance at meetings. I think that would probably mean a change to the Constitution and may have legal implications as well. You're either here or you're not here. There's no halfway house. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brading. I'm sure the monitoring officer will explain. I think it is if somebody represents the council on a different meeting, but I will ask the monitoring officer to respond. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Forwarding apologies from Councillor Debbie Andre, who has been ill and has been in hospital in the last few days. So wishing her a speedy recovery, but please note her apologies.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. So we have got apologies altogether from Councillor Kilpatrick, Councillor Mosdell, Councillor Brading, Councillor Charles Chapman, Councillor Andre, and Councillor Julie Jones-Evans, and Councillor Tyndall as well. Are there any further apologies? No. I'd like to advise members of the public, the press is present. This meeting is being recorded, but it will not be broadcasted till a later date, till after election period, for obvious reasons. And I will remind members to remain seated and speak clearly into the microphones if you wish. If you wish to stand, that'll be your choice, but please make sure that your voice projects into a microphone. Thank you. If there's a fire alarm, there's nothing planned for tonight. Please follow down the stairs and we gather outside the police station in front or through the back stairs in the car park behind the county hall. And would you please make sure your mobile phones are switched off? Thank you. If we go to the minutes, if we can approve the minutes of the meetings, 2 meetings took place in September, one on the 18th of September. Could we have a proposer and seconder, please? Propose. Thank you, Leader. Seconder. Councillor Quirk, all agree. Shall we do the same for the meeting on the 25th of September? Could I have a proposer for that one, please? Yeah. Thank you, Leader. Proposed, seconder. Councillor Quirk again, all agree? Thank you. Thank you. We go to item 2. Does any members have any declarations to declare on any items on the agenda, please? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the petition that we are considering this evening, I declare that the petition organiser is known to me personally and that I have provided with him advice on some of the wording in terms of presenting it to the meeting today, but not in its actual organisation. I've consulted with the monitoring officer. It's a non-pecuniary interest and doesn't stop me from taking part in the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Any other declarations of interest? Not. We go to item 3, which is questions from members of the public. I've got written questions and I've got one from Mr. Paul Coulsant. Would you like to stand up to the microphone, press a button and ask your question, please?
As it's now more than a year since the Council's tender notice of 3rd of October 2018 for a contract of up to 125 years to procure a partner or consortia to develop the Dinosaur Isle Museum in Sandown, what is the current status of the procurement?
Thank you for your question. I will ask Councillor Wayne Whittle to respond to that one.
Thank you. Under the procurement process, the Council has recently published an invitation to tender to 2 prospective partners, and dates have been timetabled in December 2019 for dialogue to take place, which is intended to assist in the potential responses to the invitation to tender. The deadline for final tenders is the 10th of January 2020. The Council intends to announce the award of the contract in March 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Whittle. Happy, thank you very much. Another written question from Mr. Nick Stewart from Brightston, and that is for Councillor Ian Ward to respond. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. The leader will take that one. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the last full extraordinary General Council meeting, the motion to pause St Mary's scheme was replaced by an anodyne amendment to consider changing timing and possible turning off of lights at Coppins Bridge. We have seen no proposals or ideas or anything coming out, so I would like to ask the Council to provide us, as per the written question, with details and information on what has happened with regard to the lights at Coppins Bridge, insofar as they affect, obviously, St Mary's roundabout scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Leader will respond.
Yes, Nick, thank you very much for your question. Can I begin by expressing my disappointment that you weren't allowed to stand for the Liberal Democrat position of MP in this forthcoming election. However, because I think the Isle of Wight deserves to have the range of choices, whatever your political persuasion. But there we are. I understand you might be standing somewhere more locally. But in relation to your question in particular, can I confirm I have initiated with the officers a range of discussions about traffic management at Coppins Bridge. I've also engaged with the ward councillor, Councillor Price, who sits at the back there, not only on the question of traffic lights, but as many island residents will know, there are some challenges around just the flow of traffic down to Coppins Bridge and which lane you go in. And so I've also put forward to officers some proposals of how that traffic flow can be better managed. That is ongoing, and I know Councillor Ward, who I can't remember sitting right there, thank you, is going to take that forward with officers, and we are then going to progress, as I said I would. In fact, this evening, certainly our group were discussing the implications of traffic lights and what you could or couldn't do in terms of a pilot or an experiment. So I thank all those that came forward with that, reassure you that it's ongoing, express my disappointment that those that weren't Wight to can't vote for you at the national election. Obviously, I'd encourage them to vote for the gentleman sitting next to you. But from there, we'll take it forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Is there supplementary, Mr. Stewart?
I'd like to thank the Council Leader for replying to that question with some suggestions that initiatives with officers have gone ahead. I have to express my disapproval and real concern that sometime after St Mary's roundabout has already been started, we have a public meeting, and quite a long time after that, we still have nothing to deal with the problems and chaos that are coming at St Mary's roundabout. Can you tell me anything that is likely to happen between now and Christmas?
So I think much of that will be answered in the petition debate we're going to have, but I'll ask Councillor Ward, who's here, if he could respond to your impromptu question.
The current works going on at the site of St Mary's Roundabout is programmed to finish on the 20th of December. And quite literally, it is a preparation of the site for the installation of roundabouts and management of the contraflow traffic. So, and that will stop on 20th of December.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Does anybody else wish to ask a question from the gallery? Yes, please. If you'd like to come to the microphone, state your name and ask your question, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. My name is Tanya Rebel. I did hand in a slip, so I think that's with you. My question is regarding Eco Island. I was involved early with Eco Island, and I knew David Green well. Bless him. And I just wonder, recent developments make me wonder, and I've also heard rumors that Eco Island is being replaced by Smart Island. Is this true?
Can the leader confirm?
I haven't heard that Eco Island is being replaced by Smart Island. I'm aware of Smart Island, which is an initiative by some island residents to push forward the agenda on things like electric vehicles, better, I'm sure you'll probably be joining them, very much more economic use of the environment. And certainly this council, for a whole range of measures, is definitely on that road already. So I hope that that's probably something we could all agree on, Tanya, which would be good.
Thank you, Council Leader. Since David Green passed away, I hope his heritage will be realized, but also more peer-reviewed science has shown that in form of smart meters and Internet of Things, 5G, etc., has certain dangers with it. It's untested, no health or environmental impact assessments. It's not safe. It's being rolled out without informed consent. So my question is this: will we work towards Eco Island, which is based on not smart, which ain't green and ain't ecological, but it is based on wisdom and true ecological responsibility, as in joined up thinking and holistic action, which fights all pollution, including electromagnetic radiation pollution?
Please, Tanya.
So will we have wisdom, wise island? Thank you very much.
I think you'll find that much of what you're proposing, whilst not directly related to Eco Island, is contained within our Environmental and Climate Action Plan, which Councillor Hastings has been leading on, and if you contact him direct, I'm sure he will keep you updated.
Thank you, Leader. We have got another question registered. Cheryl Shepherd, would you please ask your question?
Hello, I would like to ask if any members of the council have done any of their own research or reading into the harmful effects from the radiation from 5G.
Leader?
I think I'm just looking around the room to see if any other members flagged a hand up. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I've read myself from some work I read in Denmark, and I know France have also, so the answer to your question is yes.
You've read about the harmful effects?
Yeah, I don't say I agree with everything I read, because I'm very much, with my background, like an evidence-based approach, but I have
so you've read the evidence-based research that there is harm.
Sorry, we all did receive an email from Ms. Tanya Rebel, which several reports came through, and every member did receive it.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's up to them if they read it and for them to respond accordingly to you. I'm sure, you know, if you get in touch with each one individually, they might be able to tell you what they've read and what they understood from it.
Okay, thank you.
It's your duty to protect us.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. We go to item 4, and it's a submission of a petition, and it's headed St Mary's Roundabout Works. Is there Mr Smith to present the petition? Will you please present the petition, please?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The petition...
excuse me, Mr. Smith. Sorry to interrupt you. You have got 3 minutes to present it.
The petition shows concerns of many residents that this is the wrong scheme at the wrong time. Cobham Bridge should have been first. Even though St Mary's scheme is going ahead, people want to know when the council will get around to doing something about Cobham's Bridge. In the meantime, the council should recognise that it has done badly at communicating and engaging with local residents about the massive scheme. The council must learn to do better. But I have to say that at the moment, some of the things have been improved with information from council members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Smith. I can ask the leader to respond to that, please. You've got 3 minutes, leader.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your petition. I just wanted to check in that I've not got a lot to say before the members will probably comment. What I understand is you're asking the council to recognise the strengths of opinion in the petition and commit to a more open, transparent and long-term approach to engaging with islanders before major decisions are made. Have I got that correct? I can see you nodding yes. Thank you, Michael, for that. Let me start by saying, whilst we have a broad list of things that we did do, I seem to recall you were at the meeting that we had at the Medina Theatre, which I said I would attend and lead. I think I saw you there. And whilst only 28 people came to that meeting, I think there's a possibility, had we had it earlier, we would have had more than 28. So that tells me, and I remember a lady there herself said, this is a really good thing to do, couldn't we have done it earlier? And I think there's a fair comment there, in my view. Sometimes we think we get it right. I was thinking of examples where I could tell you, Fishbourne Lane and the work that we've done down there, really good piece of communication. My ward, the Undercliff Drive and the survey. The St Mary's we'll come back to, the West Wight with the schools. So the council, I think, does do its best to communicate effectively. I gained the message from that meeting that we could have done more sooner, and I think we should say, yeah, we'll take that away. I was actually disappointed, and I'm sure there's good reasons, but Councillor Garrett actually cancelled the Camp Hill meeting that was due to follow because I was hoping there'd be another chance to communicate. Even Island Roads have acknowledged, having done those presentations and the information that we put in the county press, which a lot of people have seen, that has been really positive for people. So I think the lesson learned there is when we do have a major scheme of that nature, and I'm sure we will do, that we really think about how people receive information. We all think they read social media every day, or they read county press, or they read Observer. Frankly, I think there's an awful lot of islanders that don't do that, and I appreciate that we need to think a bit smarter. So actually, I thank you for your petition, and on behalf of the council, I'm happy to accept it. At the end of other members, I appreciate you coming along today.
Thank you very much. Members, we've got 15 minutes to ask any questions. Councillor Garrett, you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. First, I must start with what the Leader of the Council just said about cancelling a meeting, which would have been tomorrow. I hope I've misunderstood what he said, but I have not cancelled that meeting. It is a consequence of the general election purdah period, and I was advised. So you may not be aware of that.
No, I wasn't.
I would be very pleased if it could go ahead, and we're looking at other ways of doing that. I thought you weren't aware of that, but I just wanted to make sure that correction was on record. Can I thank the Leader of the Council for what I infer from him is a reflection upon how things could have been done better. And I think an evidence of that was holding that other public meeting. But he will recall that February's Cabinet, I was pushing for a lot more engagement at that time. I don't want to rehearse all of that. What we have here is a petition that does show that people were genuinely concerned about what is happening at St Mary's Roundabout, and they remain concerned. And I'm immensely grateful to Mr Smith for organising the petition and allowing this to be aired tonight. There are emerging concerns which could have been addressed with a different engagement process. Some of them are now being addressed. The rat running in Camp Hill, we're finding some way forwards on that. The difficulties for people who live in the Albany estate getting home when the advised diversionary route would take them 4 miles down through Carisbrook and Gunville to get home, when actually they would normally take only 300 yards to get there from the roundabout. We've had traffic lost in where I live, in Honeyhill, trying to find a route that does not exist because the signage is not good enough. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to persuade council officers that better signage would have helped sort that out. We're seeing a bit of more responsiveness to issues. We see the new signs now advising people to queue in 2 lanes rather than 1. We're British. We don't like to jockey in on each other. So it's those sorts of things. And that is good. That's a sign of things beginning to become more aware. Queuing, though, of course, is terrible. As I went to Kells last night, I was astonished at the length of the queue, rolling in some places, but very slowly, up to and probably beyond the park and ride. I didn't go in that direction, I went the other way. But that's 3-4 miles of queuing. The effect on our environment must be terrible, but the effect on people are having to put up with that must also be pretty terrible as well. And what we must be open to is, even if there aren't ways of necessarily changing that, is to be very aware that we can learn from this, be very, very open to people when they raise things. It may be just one person raising a concern, but that may be because that one person has been exercised enough to do it. But that probably means there are 50, 60 others who either don't have faith in the council's willingness to respond to concerns, or their lives are just too busy, or whatever. I'm sure other colleagues will have views on that. The one I will finish with, and I think this is extraordinarily important to recognise, is that there has been an impact on businesses in that area, businesses along Forest Road, and also businesses, one or two, who'll contact me, who have been affected by the way in which the blanket double yellow lines went down in the Riverway estate. All of these things are to be learned from. Thankfully, I hope there won't be another St Mary's roundabout scheme of similar of its size in the next couple of decades. But if there is, or even any smaller scheme, we must learn from these things. But I'll be interested to hear what other colleagues have to say about what their inboxes have recorded as people's concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Councillor Lilly, you wish to speak on this item?
Yes, I respect my Newport colleagues in their action over this issue, but I think that I want to raise the fact that the wording of the petition is very important about engaging with islanders across the island about major decisions, and particularly about road infrastructure and actually planning of that. In Ryde, particularly, which is the area I represent, residents are furious about the fact of various developments, and actually there isn't joined up thinking about road infrastructure and engagement. They get actually angry that they're often have been called NIMBYs because they've raised issues. We should respect our residents more and their expertise in actually having a two-way discussion of how to resolve and actually get the kind of infrastructure that we need, that we can go to work, we live, take our children to school. And I don't think at times there is that real engagement. And lastly, as the Vice Chair of Scrutiny, when we were in front of Island Roads and Highways, we didn't get all the answers to the questions that actually we asked. We were told that it was commercially sensitive, and we still are actually expecting answers. I respect officers will come back, but we represent people who actually are frustrated by being in the kind of traffic, horrendous sort of traffic, and our roads at times are not fit for purpose. They weren't built for some of the kind of expansion and developments that we need to do, perhaps, but we're not actually really consulting. And the last point that was actually made by Councillor Garrett about social media. A lot of my residents are of an age where actually they don't do Facebook or social side. They need a good old-fashioned newsletter. They need a local community meeting that they can easily get to. We really do need to think how we communicate with our residents in a way. So I totally support this petition.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. If we keep it brief, we only got 15 minutes combined between everybody to speak. Councillor Price, you next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to thank Michael for his petition, which I was happy to sign and support. I've made it quite clear that I was against the St Mary's junction from the beginning. I must admit that I attended a number of briefings on this. I've been to quite a lot of meetings and briefings on this subject, and we looked at the revisions all the way through. The downside of this is that it just wasn't communicated to the public, and that's really what this is all about. And I'll say it again, I have the run the risk of repeating myself, but there just would not have been so much opposition to the council scheme at St Mary's if the public could agree that it was the hub of all the problems in Newport. It just isn't. We understand some of the other reasons why it needs to be done, or it's been decided that it needs to be done. I still don't agree with it. However, it's happening. We're not going to stop it now. I'll go as far as to say I think the guys working on the project are doing a particularly good job. I think they're working with a pretty tricky area to deal with, and clearly the traffic issues that are occurring around there is causing a lot of issues for people trying to get to work and home and school and so on. But, you know, this is the single biggest infrastructure improvement in the last 20 years. We should have had a public meeting like we had at Medina months before when we did. So I acknowledge that you're listening to that, Leader, and hopefully if there's anything like this crops up in our time, that we can make sure that those meetings are held in good time so the public can have their voice. But I want to sort of take something positive, if I can quickly, just to say that the good thing for this, from my perspective, is that we will actually have an experimental period at some point with the lights off on Cobbins Bridge, and I think that's a really positive thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. We've got 5 minutes left for 5 people to speak. If we can make it very brief, Councillor Abraham is next.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a petition, I think, that should affect all consultation on the island and anything that the council actually does. I think, particularly in my area, with the island plan, we've done a lot of consultation around that. There was a lot of stuff that went out before. And as a result, we consulted twice as long as we originally intended. We've had over 4,000 comments have come back, which have been sorted through, and we will be looking to go back out in March. So I think that is the type of thing that we actually need to do. I think we could take some evidence from that, because we will actually be making some significant changes to the local plan when we consult on it again in March.
Thank you, Councillor Abraham. Councillor Love, if you can make it brief, please.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for bringing this forward, this petition. It simply reinforces the message which we've been delivering all summer about communications right across all services on the island. I just want to pick up just one small thing that Councillor Garrett said, that nothing's likely to happen of this scale in the next decade. Actually, I'd like to see Coppins Bridge committed to in the next 2 years, please, because that's what the people of this island want.
Thank you, Chairman. Better communications. We need much better advance notice of works and potential. Better advance notice of works. Any works that can cause potential disruption needs to be communicated by. I think one of the problems that I had with St Mary's was I was told by officers that this consultation, these public information sessions, weren't going to happen. Now, as councillors, we should be making those decisions, not officers working on our behalf. And I think one of the things I would like to see this council doing is actually members having the guts to actually say to officers, you may want to scrutinise this a lot more effectively than you are so doing. And that was the issue that we had with St Mary's roundabout. And I think it's the same going to happen with the island plan as well. So I think we need to be much more robust in that scrutiny, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillip. Councillor Brodie.
Very quickly, Chair, the last major road works around Newport were in my ward on the St George's Way. There was plenty of advance notice of it. I was involved, as was the Vice Chairman of the Council. Medina Avenue is a boundary between our wards, as was Councillor Jones-Evans. There were grumbles, but it worked very efficiently. We delivered the roundabout by Asda, we delivered a wide in St George's Way, because we consulted and we talked to people in advance. I got about 2 complaints during those works, which overran by about 4 or 5 months, as I remember. So just be aware, if you think it's going to finish at Christmas next year up there, you're living in Clowca-Ulan. Island Roads will not deliver this by Christmas next year, given how badly they dealt with the Asda roundabout. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Councillor P.C. Wilcox.
I won't repeat my criticism of the scheme because that's already been done. It wasn't until we had a very small briefing that I requested the team to break down into manageable date chunks and change the mapping to a simplistic form. People don't understand 200 yards east of the West Junction of the North-South. I mean, it was ridiculous what the public were expected to understand when that scheme first went out. And if I would say anything, it would be communicate in a simplistic way, because that was the original scheme that we had. There was no way of getting that through to the public. If I couldn't understand it, I didn't expect the public to. So if you're going to continue, communicate in a simplistic forum. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute left for one question. If everybody's happy, I can ask the leader to sum up. Leader, you've got 2 minutes to sum up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to correct Mr. Lilly, I didn't mean to this, but I think it was me that raised the social media point, but it's a minor thing. I listened to what Councillor Brodie said. I think it's a very fair point that he makes around that was a good piece of work on that. I didn't know how much time it would overrun. That's interesting. I'm sure Councillor Ward will now take the challenge and see if we can keep on top of that, because 4 months after that will be a very interesting month. The comms, I would, at this stage, I think, want to thank, and he's in the room, Martin Neville in particular, our comms officer and the team for those, what I call them, very simple maps. But I think what they did make us realise that people need to just be able to see simply what's happening. They don't need all the detail that the technical experts have got. And certainly I've got one on my wall just to remind me what the good should look like. And I think that's good. So I'll thank you, Martin, for that publicly. Coppins Bridge is a challenge. We know it's a challenge. There's been many leaders before me and they haven't solved it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, because actually it does inconvenience the island. And there are a lot of initiatives. And just in relation to Councillor Garrett's point about the decades, I'd like to think that the Medina Bridge will appear before then. And I would once unusually agree with Councillor Love. There may be some other exciting things come down the line. So there we are. I think overall what we want to say is we did a lot of good communication. There's things we could have done better. We're acknowledging that as a council, and we will take that away, and we will try to keep up to the standard that we've got. And I just thank everybody for being patient and what I call a true islander over this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Petition has been presented by Mr. Smith. The petition motion reads that the Council resolve to recognise the strength of opinion in the petition and commits to a more open, transparent and long-term approach to engaging with islanders before major decisions are made. Those who wish to vote in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those against? And are there any abstentions? That's 31 for. Every member voted for that. Mr. Smith, it's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. We go on to item number 5. I've done a report, my official announcements. It's not as comprehensive as what I would have liked. I actually got caught out by time. I will add to the next report, but what I can't leave till then is to thank everybody who took part in the Field of Remembrance ceremonies at Carisbrooke Castle, and those people who took part in the Remembrance Sunday events throughout the island. I think it's very important to remember those who gave so much for us, to give us our future. Also, I would like to ask, I was asked by Councillor Whitehouse, who resigned from the council, just to say a couple of words. So I'll read some of the text he wrote to me to convey this message to the council, and he said, I would be grateful if you could record my personal thanks to the current leader for the opportunities he gave me to serve with his administration. I would also ask you to mention how impressed I have been with both the professionalism and the passion of the children's services and public health teams. They deliver services of which the island can be proud. And he carries on to say, to thank the residents of Newport West Ward for twice electing him as their councillor and giving him the privilege and the pleasure of serving them. And he asked all members that he told me to ask, said informal members, that you will all be invited to a leaving supper at the best restaurant in Ireland, the Gastronomy in Cowes High Street, and invitations will follow shortly. Thank you very much. And then we go to the leaders' update. Item 6.
Yeah, thank you.
You've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A leaders' update has been circulated to all members, but not published prior to today, because we are in the pre-election period, and whilst many of the issues are not relevant to that, some may be. I think the only other thing I wanted, there's 2 or 3 items I wanted members to be aware of, and I'm pleased about. First of all, the Council has made a clear decision not to change the gritting for the forthcoming winter. And although we haven't had the very cold spells they're having on the other side of the water, I think that's important, and that's a positive decision. I want Mr. Councillor Love to be able to rest and know that in October the floating bridge ran 99.5% of its intended route, which was good, which I call that reliable, 99.5. It's certainly more reliable than certain other ferry companies around the island. So we're pleased about that, and we have set up arrangements to reduce the price a little bit to encourage people as an option when the St Mary's Part 2 begins post-Christmas. A couple of other things. I did tell the council earlier, I'm now on the Local Government Association Safer and Stronger Communities Board, and I had the opportunity to meet the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for the country nationally. And I'm certainly going to make sure that the island's interest in that area look forward, and I'm grateful for that. And yesterday I chaired the National Police and Crime Panel morning conference, again dealing with some quite key issues, particularly around the big review that's going to take place of policing across the country. Members may recall, some of the more longer standing members, the Sheehy report and the idea of merging police forces, etc., etc. This is a big new piece of work that will be taking place, and whatever government is in at the end of this month will be reporting in due course. So I think members may be interested to hear about the progress of that, which I shall make sure happens. Other than that, Chair, I'm quite happy to take any questions. I probably should have mentioned I have seen the Island Deal letter that's gone to the government, and I think all members have had a copy as well. And whatever else I'd say, I think that report is pretty comprehensive. I'll be interested to see whether the outcome meets the desire.
Thank you, Leader. We've got a total of 15 minutes to ask questions of the leader on items on his report only. Who would like to ask the first question? No questions? No questions for the leader. We move on to item 7. Local tax, council tax support paper, and it is presented by Councillor Hutchinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for the length of this report. We are obliged to put forward every year the details of the scheme. It's the statutory annual review and report to the Council. I'm pleased to say that despite the intense financial pressures of which all members are aware, we have managed to preserve the scheme with its basic entitlements and funding still in place. Members will recall that in fact in previous years entitlements have been reduced by 10% under the independent administration in 2012-13 and by 10% under a Conservative administration in 2017-18. This report is not proposing any further reduction. This year the amendments are relatively minor and have 3 main elements. Firstly, to reduce the constant changes required as a result of the fluctuations in the income of claimants, often as a result of changes in the universal credit entitlement, which causes distress and uncertainty, as well as practical difficulties as a result of over-assessment. We want to avoid that. Secondly, it introduces some additional disregards, as well as preserving the existing disregards. As an example of a new disregard, we now take account of carers' income, and that is a benefit to claimants. And lastly, to reduce the complexity and cost of administration, so helping to contain back office costs, which is part of our commitment to improving efficiency. And I have to say the banding scheme which is proposed is also something which many other councils are doing in response to those difficulties. If the council are minded to approve option 2, there would be a very slight adjustment in the total amount managed through the scheme. We assess it at about 148,000, but that is in a scheme cost of 10.3 million, which is about 0.15 of 1%. Last year, the assessed cost, which of course is actually a loss of income rather than payments in cash, was £10 million, but the outturn was 10.3. So that adjustment actually is within the margin of error in such a large amount. The scheme benefits around about 10,500. Sorry, Chairman, with your indulgence, I'll finish. It is the main item of this. The scheme benefits about 10,500 of the poorest people in our society. About half of those beneficiaries are pensioners, and so have any entitlement fully protected up to 100%. The other half are people of working age whose earnings are too low or outgoings too high to enable them to pay the full amount of council tax. That group of people will still, under this scheme, have up to £7 in every £10 they owe, paid for by other island taxpayers using this scheme. And that means we have to put in about 3.25 million of locally raised council tax to support the scheme. It's known as the funding gap. I'm pleased to say we're also preserving the hardship scheme, so those who find it difficult even to pay this level can be individually helped according to their circumstances. The hardship scheme was introduced at a nominal figure of 100,000 because we weren't sure of the likely drawdown, and officers have been instructed to view every claim sympathetically. In 2018, there was a drawdown of 18,000 against the fund, and in the year to date, about 12,500. I'm very well aware that some won't claim, but nevertheless, all are advised of the fund and helped if they find difficulties in payment. Because the key elements of the scheme are unchanged, I'm expecting that fund to be sufficient to meet all claims both this year and next. However, should more unexpectedly be needed, it will be made available. I should mention, that, although it's not part of this report, that this council also manages and pays out a further £50 million to islanders every year under the government benefit scheme. So we have some substantial support there. I commend the recommendation in the report to members and look for a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor. Leader seconded. Thank you, members. Does any members wish to comment? Councillor Gary.
Chair, if I may, I wish to move an amendment. It's probably a misunderstanding on my part, but I thought that amendment would have been circulated already. That is entirely my fault. I will read the amendment I wish to propose, which is to replace recommendation 4.1 as follows: to implement a council tax, a CTS reduction scheme to include a maximum level of liability of 75% for working age council taxpayers, subject to the Cabinet adding the additional cost to their budget saving proposals to be considered by full council in February 2020 for the financial year 2020-21, and further to replace recommendation 4.2 as follows: in accordance with recommendation 4.1 above, to adopt the new council tax reduction scheme as proposed as a grid model from April 2020 and implement option 2 as the preferred income grid scheme, but with bands 1, 2 and 3 attracting a maximum level of liability of 75%. I will of course reduce that to writing for you as needed. The purpose for doing this is, first, of consistency. You will recall that I've moved a similar amendment in the last two years, and I wish to do so again.
Point of order, please, Chair. Can I ask which, in principle, sounds something I could support, but I would like to be able to see the wording.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. We're just going to get some hard copies now.
We've just been presented literally.
Yeah, can we do it? Are you finished presenting your amendment, Councillor Garrett?
I would speak to it, but obviously it's presented, but I still have some remarks as to explain it, of course, Chair.
Of course, at this late stage,
yeah.
we do need time to scrutinise the paper, please.
Yeah. But it does need the explanation from me, so the remainder of my time, if I may, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Barry. We'll take 5 minutes to read the paper and to discuss amongst colleagues. Thank you, councillors. If we can make a start. Councillor Garrett, lost track here. So shall we start again? And you've got 3 minutes to present your amendment.
That's very kind of you, Chair. I'm being consistent. I have presented an amendment in the last 2 years which would have similar effect. It's a different kind of setup of the scheme. Members, I'm sure you've read this very long document, and I would draw your attention in any case to pages C28, C29 and C30, where it states things like people responding to the consultation. You cannot stretch people any further. You cannot keep on reducing the support to those people who are living on the breadline, and to jiggle money from the least in our society is not the way to go about saving money. And I'm sure all of us in this chamber would agree with those sentiments. And so I bring forward this amendment to test that opinion and see if others agree with me that we should be doing more for those who are most hardest hit in all of these things. One thing I would draw your attention to also is, whilst there is an exceptional hardship fund, I have some concerns about the way in which it has been phrased. If you look at page C193, paragraph 4.1, subsection C, the inference from that is somewhat distasteful in that it suggests that people who are living on the breadline and need to seek to use this fund are also those who are not managing their finances as effectively as possible. And I think that's kind of, I would find that insulting if I were a person there. I think that the poorest are probably the best at managing their monies because they absolutely have to. And I would hope that actually the phrasing of that section might be looked at to bring about a more engaging rather than paternalistic approach to the application of that fund. That fund exists, but it's very much discretionary at the council's give or take. What I'm proposing here is that we say to those people who are struggling the most that we recognise that, and I'm sure all of us in an ideal world would go back to a 100% situation. Here we can go to a 75% situation for those who are hardest hit. And I would hope there would be a discussion to follow to at least recognise across the chamber that whatever decision we take tonight, we are remembering those that struggle, that don't have that spare piece of change, that are delighted to find that the money that is down the back of a sofa, because it makes a huge difference. And some of us have been in that situation, I know, from previous speeches in this chamber, that they know that finding an extra few pence a week can make a great difference. So I'm not trying to lambast the administration. I believe that you would agree with me that in an ideal world we would revert to a 100% situation and help people who are at their most difficult. But I am asking those across the way to consider, actually, do you think this is now the time to start restoring some of that help that we can give to those people?
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Barry, do you wish to speak now or reserve the right to speak later? Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Lilly, please.
I feel that it's important to emphasise that many families and families that are my ward and neighbouring ward in Ryde don't see austerity going. They're actually really, really struggling. I would recommend to all members here that they actually see the latest Ken Loach film called Sorry We Missed You, which shows a working family who are on 0 contract hours, the mother being a support worker and the father working 14, 15 hours delivering parcels like Amazon to our door. They're a working family that is really struggling of that. Well, those kinds of families that definitely live in my ward who actually really find it very difficult. I have the food bank in my ward and I regularly go, and most of the people that are using the food bank are actually working families that are really, really struggling, are heavily in debt with that. And some of their jobs they do, like the delivery ones, if they don't deliver on things on time, they get fined for that. So we have on this island many families that are really struggling. And even though I recognise your adjustments in the report about the universal credit and the flexibility, which I support, and I'm glad that you have that, and the hardship fund, I do think there's a point that if we can give extra help to those families who are at risk of coming into our statutory services, which we will then have to pay for. If a family breaks down and actually cannot cope, and again, if you see the Ken Loach film, they're on the edge of that, then all those children, if they came into our care system, we have to pay a much higher price. So I just feel that it's important to get the message over of the families that are really struggling. And even though I support many of the things that you have in it, the Councillor Hutchinson, I do feel that if we actually increase back the reduction to 75%, we would actually be sending a message of that we're listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Fuller, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. The hardship fund is something I wanted to ask the Deputy Leader a question on. We know that in the past the acceptance of the hardship fund hasn't really been doing its job properly because people haven't been taking the hardship fund up. One of the things that I read within the report on page C196 was that the hardship fund is actually authorised at the discretion of the council. Again, that discretion is, if people aren't being accepted for the hardship funds, are the constraints too tight and are people still falling through the nets? That is a concern that I have. But I do very much support Councillor Garrett's proposal insofar as we have more children on the island that are in poverty, we have more residents in fuel poverty, and we have more working families that are suffering from benefits, sanctions that make it difficult for them to work. We should be supporting those people, and this paper does not properly do that. So I will be supporting. It's not perfect, it's very far from perfect, but it is better than the proposals that are being put across the other side of the chamber. So thank you for that, Councillor Garrett. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. For that, remind members, this is not question time, it is a debate. Councillor Hutchinson will sum up at the end. Councillor Quirk.
A rough calculation is that this will cost £500,000. We have a duty as a council to put in a balanced budget. The vast majority of our budget is actually on children's services and adult social care. So the inference is we have to cut something from there, which are the same people. So you're taking it out of one hand and giving it back in the other. So if this was a serious thought, rather than a political opportunism, this should have been presented as a fully costed budget amendment. It shouldn't have been here now. It should have been here when with the putting in for the budgets in the first place. And I think this is cynical.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Brady.
Works information, as I recall, we have to make this decision by January every year, so it's not cynical, far from it. It has to be dealt with by January, and in fact it's actually early this time, not from when it's normally being done, and Stuart's nodding his head. So just a point of fact. One of the themes of the report and throughout the appendices, if you waded through them all, etc., is why we're doing it. You know, the reason is universal credit, and Councillor Hutchinson referred to the myriad changes in universal credit, you know, causing distress and uncertainty. And of course, there's an irony here that universal credit was brought in by an MP who I genuinely hope loses his seat because he's a vile man, Ian Duncan Smith, to introduce an element of predictability. And yet, as somebody who represents a ward where many people survive on universal credit, the introduction of that on the Isle of Wight has had a devastating effect on so many families who struggle, who scratch around for this 50p here, this 50p here, there, to provide milk perhaps for their children so they can have cereal in the morning and such like that. So there is an irony there that we're talking about distress and uncertainty when it's resulting from the introduction of universal credit, and hopefully that appalling benefit will be abandoned at some point in the future. The main point I want to make is the hardship scheme, something that I secured out of the previous administration when I think it was the coalition government actually brought in, the Lib Dems were in alliance with them instead of the Greens in those days. It brought in the fact that you had to pay a percentage of your council tax, even if you didn't have a bean to your name. And I secured a hardship scheme out of that. But frankly, over the years, we haven't really promoted it. It's a discretionary element of money. And I think Councillor Hutchinson referred to about 12,000 in the last year or whatever being paid out of what is a six-figure fund. Now, Councillor Quirk refers to a £500,000 saving here. I'm not sure if that's a correct figure. It may be, but certainly any deficiency in supporting Councillor Garrett's amendment could be met by whatever is unspent from the hardship fund. In the longer term. Currently, that unspent bit is used as an incidental saving as part of, balancing the books at the end of the year. But it does seem to me that the hardship scheme, isn't promoted well, and that maybe should be looked at in the entire round of the difficulties that people who have no money whatsoever have in trying to address paying, 25% of their council tax. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I shall not be supporting this amendment, and I doubt my colleagues will either. There's an irony here. After all I said to our Liberal Democrat colleague up in the gallery about, and the other gentleman, about communication, along comes Councillor Garrett with lastminute.com, and then decides that we should expend, it's around about £470,000 of council budget on a I'm sorry, that's just not the way to run business. And this council has a duty to all the residents of the Isle of Wight to make sure that we manage the budget appropriately. This amendment, if agreed, as I say, would put over £470,000 at a time when we're trying to do the books. And the other thing is, and I've spent a number of years of colleagues working with Councillor Hutchinson, everybody knows that he is very thorough. He will have considered a lot of aspects, and this paper by Councillor Hutchinson, and indeed the officers that support him, creates no change for people on this island. It's not gone up. It's comprehensive, and it allows us to be consistent as we approach this year's budget. So I thank you, Councillor Garrett, but no thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Love.
Thank you. When we talk about the hardship fund, I remember the pain of my mother and the shame that she felt having to ask for hardship funds when I was a child. And so this is, the hardship fund is not really promoted in a way that could actually enable people to engage with it, because it still feels like a shame to some people. I welcome what Councillor Garrett said, last minute or not, because anything at all, anything that can help to improve things for our citizens out there is a bonus and a benefit. So I very much appreciate that. I mean, we have to remember that hardship comes in many ways. We as a council are hardly an example of supporting our own community when we employ people on 0 contract hours ourselves on the floating bridge and here in this building. And those are the people who are most affected when things crash, if you like, or even break down, as the floating bridge does, who then lose significant amounts of money and rely on benefits. So I will be supporting this and we should be seeking to find the money rather than looking at how we're going to cut other services to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barry, you seconded this amendment. We'd like to speak now.
Thank you. We're told on many occasions just recently that austerity's over. There's millions of pounds coming to the Isle of Wight. Good times are just around the corner. Now that might be electioneering by certain people, I don't know. I assume that Boris and all the rest of them are all telling the truth. If these good times are coming and austerity's over, this is a chance by this amendment to share some of those good times, some of that money that we're going to get with the poorest and the worst off of our island society. So I'd urge you to ignore your leader for once and vote with us and do something about easing the lot of those in...
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Hutchison to respond, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A few points there. Firstly, I'm quite happy to look at the wording. Certainly is not our intention to castigate anyone. As you say, we've all been in that position. My parents were in that position. I know exactly what you mean. Secondly, we are not reducing support. It would have been quite easy, because we got a majority, to say, well, let's knock it down by another 10%, save £1 million, sorts out the budget problem. We're not doing that. We recognise that this is a real benefit for people on very low incomes. Comments have been made about the hardship scheme and it doesn't really work. Well, I deal with it all the time. It does work. Anybody who is having a problem can claim on the hardship fund, and we give out payments to cover that. And that can be more than the 75% that we're talking about. So there is not evidence that it doesn't work. I do appreciate that if you have to apply for a fund rather than get it given to you automatically, then it is more difficult. We all get stuff given to us automatically. I just received £100 worth of winter fuel payment. I don't know why I get it. We all get that. So what we're trying to do is to acknowledge that it is actually a really difficult position and that we are trying to target the money to the people who most need it. So there is no cut. The amount of the change of 5% as a statutory improvement would mean 470, maybe 500. So let's call it about £500,000 a year. And our 3-year medium-term budget would mean that instead of finding £4.5 million every year, we've got to find 5. So we're actually looking at if we carried this on each year, which presumably we would want to do, we're looking at finding another £1.5 million. That has to come from the residents of this island, many of whom are just about managing and can't claim for anything. So what we're trying to do is achieve a balance. Anybody who is in real difficulty gets help. We are still paying £7 out of every £10 of their council tax. And having wrestled with the next year's budget for hour upon hour with our Section 151 officer, the leader, cabinet members and the chief exec, I know just how difficult it is going to be for us to find that £4.5 million. We're certainly not in a position to find 5. And so, unfortunately, the practicality of it is that we just cannot afford to increase it. So I will be voting against the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. If we look at the amendment from Councillor Garrett, we're going to vote on that first. Now, those in favour of name vote? Thank you. We'll have a name vote. We will call the names out, and that member will indicate whether they vote for the amendment, against the amendment, or abstain from voting on that amendment. And we can start calling the names, please.
Councillor Abraham. Councillor Axford. Councillor Bertie. Councillor Beston. Councillor Churchman. Councillor Hastings. Councillor Hendry. Councillor Hobart. Councillor Hutchinson. Councillor Merwill. Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Outlaw. Councillor Peace. Councillor Price. Councillor Quirk. Councillor Ward. Councillor Whittle. Councillor Downer. Councillor Fuller. Councillor Howe. Councillor Medland. Councillor P.C. Wilcox. Councillor Stevens. Councillor Love. Councillor Lilly. Councillor Brodie. Councillor Barry. Councillor Garrett. Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Smart. Councillor Stewart.
Those (19 against, 12 for). So the amendment is full. Thank you. If we go back to Councillor Hutchinson's paper, has been seconded, and we can debate that. Any member wish to speak on that? No? We go straight to the vote. And the V starts. Call for name vote or no? Just those four. Okay, those four. Councillor Hutchinson, to raise your hands, please. Those against? And any abstentions? Abstentions? Thank you. That is 19 for and 12 against, and that is carried. Thank you very much. If we go to item 8, it's appointment of a designator independent person, paper D. You've all read the paper. And it's recommendation. The recommendation is that John Matthews is appointed as a designated independent person for a period of 4 years. Yes. And I will look for a seconder. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Oh.
So it's Councillor Smart. Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am more than delighted to second John Matthews. John is one of the most loyal members of the Isle of Wight community, and I think we could not look for anyone better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barry.
Just a question, really. How do you get to the figure of £301?
How do we get to the figure? We don't know. I don't know how that's worked out.
Well, it seems like this. I mean, members' allowances are worked out as a formula. What's the formula that works out is allowance, and how does it come to £301? I think that's a fair question. Also, while we're at it, you're talking about options here. One, option 2, to appoint a different designated independent person. How did we appoint the first one in the first place? How did we arrive at Mr. John Matthews?
The first person is appointed by this same procedure, and the funding is decided by the independent remuneration panel, who decide all remunerations. They decide on the figure. Anybody? Councillor Brodie, you're next to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm a little puzzled by the report, to be frank, because although I'm, bottom of the pile on this council, the new monitoring officer did consult me on the appointment of Mr. Matthews, but at no point do I recall being advised there was a second applicant who was considered suitable for appointment, but of the two, only one was going to be recommended tonight, particularly since the second person at paragraph 2, which is a chap called Alistair Drain, has also indicated a wish to step down soon. And it seems to me a little daft to only be pointing at one out of two suitable people when the other one Mr. Hicks has stood down, Mr. Drain wants to stand down, but we're only going to appoint one. So it just seems a bit daft to me, in my fairly logical brain, which doesn't always match council officers, I have to say, that we don't actually appoint both of them tonight. I mean by that senior council officers, of course, members of the corporate management team I generally criticise. So can I have an explanation to that? And secondly, with regard to Mr. Matthews, I have no idea who he is. I've never voted for any of these DIPs in my life. I think our complaint system is a joke, and I will be abstaining. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know the answer to Councillor Brodie's questions. I wish I did, but I too don't know, and there is some logic in his comments. I do know John Matthews, and I met, as I'm looking around, probably quite a few council members do, because he holds the current post as Deputy Lord Lieutenant. Strangely enough, I met Mr. Matthews when he was a coroner on the Isle of Wight. I think I would describe my first interview with him as being hauled before him is probably a more apt thing. But certainly a man who's known by the island residents. He has sound integrity in a range of ways, and whilst I may not agree with all the things that he says, I respect the man. So on that appointment, and I declare my interest insofar as I do know him, I'm very comfortable supporting that. I think Councillor Brodie raised an interesting question, and I don't know whether we're in a position to resolve that tonight as well, because we know we've got a second vacancy coming. It seems more efficient if we said we'd take two, and if Mr. Matthews is first, that's fine, and then the other gentleman can be second if that's who we so choose.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Abraham.
Yes, Chairman. I think the point that the leader has actually said, is it possible then, if Mr. Drain has indicated is intending to resign or stand down, can we actually appoint two tonight if they are both been acceptable? Is that practical? I've seen the chief executive shaking his head when or nodding his head, I should say, when the leader was speaking. So, is that possible? It would certainly short circuit the process if we could actually do that tonight, rather than having to go through all this again. And like the deputy chairman said, I know John Matthews. I've known him for a long time when he was a solicitor at Medina Borough Council, and I think he would be really a good man to have in the position.
Thank you, Councillor Abraham. John.
Chairman, merely as a point of explanation, because Councillor Abraham has mentioned my name, I was not in agreement with the suggestions from both Councillor Brodie and Councillor Stewart, but I don't know the processes, whether that's possible. Certainly the person's not named in the report, and people might have an interest or may have some comment they want to make. So I think in that particular sense, I'd look to the monitoring officer for review, but I think it would have been sensible to have done that, but I think it's more sensible to bring a report back later on and just vote on the paper you have in front of you.
Thank you. Leader?
If the protocol allows, I'd just propose, as Councillor Brodie has, that we nominate Mr Matthews, and we also agree the second person, but they bow to the monitoring officer who has all the minds on this issue.
Thank you. Please.
Chairman, the only nominated person before the council this evening is Mr Matthews, and that's the only decision that the council can make today. We do have Mr Drain as our existing designated independent person, although he has mentioned his future wish to step down from his role, that there is no indication that he will do that anytime soon. In the event that he does, we still have then one designated independent person, and that is the number of DIPs that most local authorities in fact have. If Mr Drain gives us notice that he wishes to stand down, then we can, of course, at that point, bring the matter back before the council for further decision. But at the present time, if the council approves Mr Matthews' appointment this evening, we will then have two designated independent persons, and that is considered to be sufficient and appropriate for this authority.
Thank you, Mr Wall. Councillor Brodie.
Chair, I'm even more mystified as to why we weren't, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Andre, all the minor groupings, leaderships were consulted about this. No other person was mentioned. And I'm being asked to make a choice where I don't know who the other person was. And I may think that that person was far superior than another member of the Isle of Wight Great and Good establishment. It's funny how we never get any working class people apply for these situations, isn't it, really? But in fact, you've actually persuaded me. I'll vote against Mr Matthews because I think this is a stitch-up. And I'm extremely disappointed about the way it's been done. And everybody is saying everybody knows John Matthews. I bet you if I went and asked people in my ward, 99.9% of them wouldn't know him. And I bet that would be the case in many of your wards as well, even though you may all be great pals with John Matthews. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I'm sure when the posts become available, we will consider somebody else. But tonight, we're looking at the recommendation in front of us. Only this council can appoint a person for this position, and we're doing that now. And the recommendation is that John Matthews is appointed as the designated independent person for a period of 4 years. And those for the recommendation, please raise your hands. Those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. Okay. That is 25 for, 1 against and 4 abstentions. That is carried. Thank you very much. We go to item 9, which is members' questions of the leader. No questions submitted to the leader. And that calls to the end of the meeting. And I close the meeting. Thank you very much. Good night.